The December 7th Salina City Commission meeting. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Angel.
Here.
Commissioner Arbke.
Here.
Commissioner Jennings.
Here.
Commissioner Peck.
Here.
Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda is the Citizens Forum. This is where anyone from the public can come up and speak on anything not on today's agenda. Please come up to the podium and give us your name and address. You can come and speak on anything not on today's agenda. Not on today's agenda. Otherwise, when we get to that portion on today's agenda, you'll be able to speak on that topic. Seeing that there is no one here for the Citizen Forum, we'll move on to awards and proclamations.
Item 4.1, Resolution Number 096674, expressing gratitude and appreciation to Kenneth P. Schmidt for his employment with the City of Salina from March 16, 1991 to December 15, 2009.
I don't believe Mr. Schmidt is here. So on his behalf, we will accept the plaque that is given for him. And I need commission action on this resolution.
Mayor, I move we adopt resolution number 09-6674.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept resolution number 09-6674, expressing gratitude and appreciation to Kenneth P. Schmidt for his employment with the City of Salina from March 16, 1991 to December 15, 2009. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. We'll move on to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time.
Item 5.1, public hearing and report on petition number 4321, requesting the closure and vacation of Cypress Street from Willow Drive to the west to Comanche Avenue on the east in the replat and the Edge Mill addition.
At this time, I'll open the public hearing. Mr. Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an application or petition filed by Roberta Kaufman, who resides in Galveston, Texas, but who owns a number of lots on East Crawford and in that general vicinity. And the lots that are present there were platted at a dimension of 60 feet by 110 feet, which they were intended to house modest-sized homes for the air base, but the property during the 1970s became commercialized, but the fact remained that they were 110-foot lots, which makes them shallow, especially with the double frontage. And Roberta owns 6 commercially zoned lots on the south side of Crawford, and also owns some lots on the south side of Cypress between Willow and Birch. And so she has filed a petition requesting the closure of the and the vacation of the right-of-way for Cypress Street between Willow Drive and Comanche. And it looks like the shaded area there on the screen, with Willow being on the left and Comanche on the right, and Centennial Park being to the south of that. And so our abutting property owners are Roberta Kaufman, but City of Salina is also an owner, and Dale and Robin Blake with Hickory Hut are also abutting owners. And her reasoning for doing this is she's trying to deepen the lots, and if you envision this street missing, she would have one large lot there that would extend all the way to there that's already commercially zoned, and then if the street were eliminated, you could deepen those lots off of Crawford as well to allow for redevelopment or new development on those lots that the 110-foot depth just won't support. And as part of that request, Cypress Drive, Vacation, Birch Drive, which doesn't presently go through, would be connected to Crawford as part of any redevelopment of that site. In 1994, the City Commission adopted a policy that goes over and above state law and requires the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing anytime a street closure is proposed. And the reason for that is that to give property owners and businesses that could be affected by a street closure a forum to weigh in on their thoughts about the potential closing of that street. That was done in this case, but based on phone calls that we've received and probably phone calls that you've also received, there are people that are outside of that notification area who have taken interest. And so our recommendation would be, after hearing from anyone who would speak today, to allow us to go back and notify an expanded area, because one of the things I observed with the conversations that I had with people calling in this week is they didn't really understand what was being proposed. That's because they didn't get letters because they were too far south, and they didn't attend the Planning Commission meeting. I personally spoke to 9 different owners, none of whom were opposed. The Blakes were undecided, and they have decided that they are opposed. And so the Hickory Hut site is right here, and they abut that property there, and that can't be vacated without their consent. So there's probably 2 reasons to send it back to the Planning Commission. One is to have an opportunity for more public input. The other is, at the time the Planning Commission considered it, the Blakes were still undecided, and so they recommended closure of the entire area, and that's not an option now with the Blakes' opposition. So I'd be happy to stand for any questions. The thought with this was that the pluses of gaining a direct street connection to Crawford and access to Centennial Park and being able to close driveways on Crawford and replace them with sidewalks and getting new development in this corridor outweighed the loss of the street, which is mostly used for parking at this point. But I'd be happy to address any questions because this is a public hearing, but our recommendation would be to let us expand the notice area and invite more people to give the Planning Commission input.
Does Birch Street then become a dead end? Would it become a dead end?
No.
It does go all the way through to Crawford, right? So you're going
It does not. It does not today.
Right, but
And-
you're proposing for it to go all the way through to Crawford.
Yes. And if you think about what Mound View used to be east of McDonald's, there was no connection between Crawford and Faith Drive, and then that street was connected through from Faith to Crawford. Putting Birch through here would be something similar to that.
And that property that goes right through, the street that would be going all the way through to Crawford?
That's owned by Roberta Kaufman, so she would deed that over to the city as public right-of-way as part of this.
Okay.
So if someone wanted to go to the spray park or something, they would, at that point, just turn directly onto Birch.
Right. And we've heard, over the years, there's been a lot of comments from people who stayed at motels on East Crawford that they didn't know there was a park there, because you can't see it and you can't really get to it directly. One thing that putting Birch through would do would be give somebody direct access from Crawford to the park that you don't have today.
Now, you said that the owners of the other property are opposed to the street closure behind them?
Right. That would be the Blakes, who own Hickory Hut, and they've got just a portion over in this corner right here. Roberta Kaufman owns everything else, but they own this property there. And I met with them for over an hour in person, explaining it to them, seeing if they were in favor or opposed, if they wanted to sign the petition. They said they didn't want to sign it, but they weren't going to fight it either. And then after the Planning Commission meeting, they had second thoughts and have submitted a letter saying they don't want it vacated behind their restaurant, primarily because they don't want to lose the parking.
Okay. So then if Birch Street wasn't extended, but would the Planning Commission then hear a request to close a portion of Cypress?
Well, the two options, if this is sent back to the Planning Commission, their two options would be to just vacate the piece between Willow and Birch and build this and eliminate that, keep this open. Or the other thing they could do is they could vacate Cypress to here, to the boundary of the Hickory Hut property, eliminate the street. That turns this into a dead end essentially, but then that allows these other lots to be deepened as well. As if you drive out there, the only two things that are there are a foundation from a house that was lost in a tornado and the small building that Hickory Hut used to operate out of. And at 110-foot depth, that's probably not going to get much more than that there.
Now, Hickory Hut, let's see, if they were in favor of vacating that, then that portion of the street could be expanded into parking, correct?
Right. And the other part of this, which is up to you as the City Commission, because what happens is the south 30 feet of Cypress reverts back to the city. I think there was something in the minutes or in a motion from the Planning Commission that they thought the City Commission should turn around and give the part that would go to the park back to the adjoining owners to further deepen the lots, but that would be up to you.
Still, I'm wondering on the layout of their parking, they've got sort of a narrow parking lot there. I'm trying to think of how you would even get out of there without the street.
Well, what I talked to him about was just because it's not a street anymore doesn't mean you have to take out the paving. So if this property reverted back to them, they could still use that as part of the access and circulation for their property. The only difference is they would own it and they could decide how they wanted to use that.
I guess what I'm thinking is, when you go into Hickory Hut's parking lot, it's a narrow parking lot that, I mean, the stalls they all face one direction, I think.
You have that aerial photo in there, Trapper? The one that Dustin did that has the shaded area?
Yes.
This is an aerial photo, and that's Hickory Hut right here.
Right, you see that, okay, to the west there, it's fairly narrow. I'm just trying to figure out how a car even turns around to get back out onto Crawford without going through their drive-through.
Well, today what cars do is they go around like this, or they just exit out on Cypress.
Right,
But see, if you vacated this, that could stay in place, and they could still do that. It would just be a driveway for Hickory Hut instead of a street.
But the rest of Cypress would still be open, I guess.
Well, it would either be closed right here,
Right.
and there'd be some kind of barrier there, and this would come back, or this whole piece would be left open, in which case you could just close. That wasn't really in front of the Planning Commission, because they were of the belief at the time that everybody was on board with the full thing, and the Blakes got assistance from Don Mars to look at their property and lay things out, and Don recommended that they support the vacation, but they decided that they didn't want to at this time.
Okay.
So that leaves you with leaving this open. I guess one way to visualize it is Wheel Place that runs, and 7th Street would be an example of a street that used to be that isn't. But Wheel Place is, the street is no longer a public street, but the hospital didn't rip out all the paving. It's just their privately owned driveway now instead of being a public street. So just because you close the street and eliminate the right-of-way, you could configure that in a way where the Hickory Hut could still use the paving to circulate.
But then it becomes part of their property, is that correct?
Correct.
And they realize that?
Yes.
Okay.
But they were not interested in a change at this time. And I think part of what they talked about was that they view the street as a barrier between them and the skateboarders, and they were concerned about it being eliminated also. But there may, based on conversations I had, there may be people who have attended today from the public that may want to speak to this, but we still think we need to expand the notification and go back to the Planning Commission.
Dean, how closely did we look at the traffic patterns that would exist if Birch is extended to Crawford? I know you talked a little bit about limiting the access of other drives, but in creating that street, it looks like it's fairly close to the street to the west, and I just would want to make sure that when you look at all the driveways across to the north, that we don't actually create a pattern that would cause some problems on Crawford Street.
Yeah, I guess the trade-off is this is like one gigantic continuous driveway, and that would all come out and be curbed over and replaced by this, and this driveway would come out, and so all the access, if this were built, would be from the sides, not from Crawford.
Okay.
And I guess we do have a site plan, Alyssa, which I think is item 3. If Cypress Street were there, it would be running right through here. And so if you took all of Roberta Kaufman's property, got rid of Cypress Street, and this was the new Birch and this was Willow, you'd have something where this would be all sealed up and you'd have a sidewalk across there, and then you'd replace that with side street access. So if you look at it from a spacing standpoint, by closing up the driveways, you're actually spacing the traffic out more.
Okay. Was there any look at buffering on the south end of the property to separate that from the residential?
Well, the conversation, I talked with both the owners from Willow and Birch that live south of there. Even if the street was left open, those properties are zoned commercial, and you'd have to have a minimum 15-foot buffer between any commercial on those lots and the lots to the south, and that would not change. This doesn't let anybody build any closer because they could build there today within 15 feet.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of a physical, for example, a line of evergreen trees or something like that to separate versus just the spacing.
There's 6-foot privacy fence there today, but you would use that 15-foot area for trees or evergreens or things to buffer that. But I guess if you go back maybe to 1, Alyssa. This property here is already zone C5. So somebody could, if they could squeeze it in, they could squeeze buildings in right here that are commercial, but it wouldn't probably be as desirable as if you could develop the whole thing at once. So it's starting right here where the first 2 houses are. I've probably taken up too much time for an item we're recommending sending back, but
Well, just so we have it
let's see
straight
if
through our heads.
anybody else has comments.
I'll open it up to public comment.
Yes, I'm Alvin Casper. I live at 727 Willow Drive, and I was one of the 4 people that got a letter notifying of the closure of Cypress Street. And after I got my notice on the 17th of November, approximately that time frame, and so I talked to Mr. Andrew and I expressed some concern about having access to the easement. And he said, well, there would be a parking lot at the north end of the easement because the city utilities are in the easement, the electrical, the sewer, the cable. And so he said, well, it would all be available. And I said, well, I burn wood sometimes, and I have a trailer and a pickup, so I have to back down that easement. And it makes it a lot easier to get it in my backyard than having to, because I don't have a driveway or anything on the side of my house to access my backyard, so I use the easement quite extensively. And so I told Mr. Andrew that I would rather not have Cypress closed because it makes it easier for me to just pull onto Cypress and then back onto the easement rather than try to jockey around cars in a parking lot or whatever. And so I didn't say no, I don't want it, but I'd said that I would rather not. And so after I talked to some other people and found out about this meeting about a week ago, I went down Birch Street and down Willow Drive, and I collected 22 names of people that said that they do not want Cypress closed, and they do not want Birch open directly to Crawford due to safety concerns for the speeding traffic coming down past the park. They have the basketball court just right off the street. They have volleyball, and then if you go on down the street, they got a water park, and they got little kids down there and whatnot. And the people that I talked to on Willow Drive were complaining about the speed of the traffic there, and there's the direct shot right off of Crawford. So if we open up Birch directly from Crawford, I think we're going to get a lot of speed picked up on the traffic coming down Birch. And I just don't really feel that it would be a safe situation for the kids, because I walk my dog around the park there, not every day, but quite a bit, and there's a lot of times kids are playing basketball, the ball bounces out in the street, you know, this and that. And so I would highly recommend not closing Cypress and not opening Birch to Crawford. So
Sir, did all your neighbors receive the same letter that you received?
there was
or
only
did you-
4 of them.
So did you go further down the street, is what you're saying?
Yes, I went
What is
down.
the first cross street as you're headed south on Willow?
Plum,
Okay, just so I know how far down.
yeah.
Okay.
I didn't get clear down to Plum the evening that I was doing this, why it was getting later, so I think I got down to within 3 houses of Plum Street
Okay.
on Birch, and then I only went about 2/3 of the way down on Willow Drive. But I figured that the people on Birch would be more concerned than the people on Willow Drive, because on down Willow Drive, the easement is partially blocked by some of the privacy fences and stuff that have been built out into the easement, so there's not going to be full access down the easement. So the power companies have to come sometimes up from the south and down south from the north. So, but you know, that's the property owners with the privacy fences problems. If the city needs access, why then they have to remove their fence. But I don't know, and plus the fact, from what I understand, just looking at these other 2 slides that they had up here, I don't know what they're proposing right now, but if they got a drive-through coming down on the south side there, why that's, you know, if I try to get back in my easement and they got a drive-through lane right there at the end of that easement, why that's going to create a lot of issues for me, because, you know, I got about an 18-foot trailer that I back with a pickup, and sometimes at the end of a day when you're cutting wood, why you just a little bit tired and, you know, don't hit her all just quite right the first time.
Oops.
So, but
Hey.
the other thing too is, you know, if they vacate all the businesses that are there now, you know, Rod has been a merchant there and has the liquor store, the gas station. He employs several people. You know, those people are all going to be out of a job. And so I just kind of feel like that, you know, I think we ought to support the businesses that have been established there for a while. And from what I understand, there was supposed to be an Arby's coming in And the people that I talked to down the streets weren't really interested in having an Arby's coming up on the corner of Crawford and Willow.
Okay.
So I just kind of wanted to share all that with you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you. Additional public comment?
Hi, my name is Linda Hyman, and I'm a manager of one of the businesses that would close if this goes through. My only question is, why would our city take away our jobs? There will be less jobs as a result of this. The businesses have been around for 30 years. The city talks about developing this land. The only thing they are doing is destroying 2 local businesses for a fast food chain. Development is supposed to create, not eliminate. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor and Commissioners, I'm Don Mars. I represent Dale and Robin Blake. I just wanted to tell you I concur with Mr. Andrews' description of their opinion with regard to closing Cypress adjacent to their property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mars.
My name is Susan Herman. I live at 741 Willow Drive. I live 5 houses down from the corner of Cypress and Willow. Been there 25 years. That particular street is used a lot by walkers. We don't have to ask for a walking trail in our neighborhood. We've got a good one right there. Easy access to the park. Years ago when I moved in, the neighborhood was full of children. And then they all grew up and went away. And we're just now getting some families in with small children. And the concern for those kids and the accessibility to the park, I feel, would be gone if Cypress was closed. I walk that street every day that I can, and I'm able to, with my little dog, and go over to the park and watch the kids play that are over there. But the safety concern I have, also the bringing the families back into our neighborhood is quite a deal. And if that was closed, Plum is not that's a long block from Cypress down to Plum. That's not a little short block. But you'd have to go around to the south end of Centennial Park, which is empty. I mean, they play soccer there sometimes. But to get over to the Water Spray Park, the kids on Willow would have to go a long ways around to get to the park. Cypress is used, and another thing I have on a traffic concern with Birch, getting out of Willow onto Crawford, can be a bear sometimes. It's helped since the light was put in there on Centennial, just a block away. But a lot of people will turn on Cypress and go on down to, I can't think of the name of the street, but the next street east, Choctaw, east of Comanche there, to get out on Crawford, because it gives them bigger enough space that they can get out and not get all jammed up. That's all I have to say. I'd like to see it stay open, mainly for our neighborhood. The safety concerns I have for the children. And I would certainly miss my little walking path in the morning. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Jeff Mace, Compro Realty, 157 South 7th. I represent the applicant, working with both parties, the incoming restaurant, as well as working very closely with the Kaufmans and the family. This whole idea was born by way of what Mr. Andrew had alluded to, by redeveloping that area because of the lot depth. The only way we're ever going to be able to redevelop that, which we thought was a good idea by virtue of it being a corridor, main entrance into the town, proximity to I-135. having interest by a national retailer to come in, make a significant investment in that area, dress the place up, access issues, all of those things. So that's what got this process started. Mrs. Kaufman owns, as he had indicated, both sides of the proposed restaurant location, but also then on the other side of Birch. They're going to fully fund the Birch Street extension, so there's no money coming out of the city budget for anything of that nature as part of the agreement with the Planning Commission's approval. We don't have any issue whatsoever if Blake's choose to or not choose to participate. That's purely up to them. I mean, we have no issue with their problem. I heard a concern about jobs. We have a signed contract currently with the national retailer to go in that will bring a significant amount of jobs just there by virtue of volume and managers, assistant managers, staff, so on and so forth. We also have interested parties in the east side of the Birch, what would be the proposed Birch development, to go in. Another national group would not be a restaurant user, but another national group to go in there and redevelop that, which would mean taking out that old house that's been vacant and in a poor state of repair, et cetera, to go in and develop. We don't have that deal done, but this thing is taking us significantly longer than we anticipated, so we've kind of let that sit until we could get some answers to all this, because there's no sense in continuing to stack up contracts that are contingent upon. So it would not only be the one business coming in, but also potentially another one that would be taking that old building off of there and just redeveloping the entrance into town. The other thing, I also heard an issue of access to the park. You know, just because there's going to be a retailer there doesn't mean that they wouldn't have the same type of access to walk through that parking lot or so on and so forth to get to the park. They don't have to go all the way around. It's not going to be a fence, so on and so forth. And Mr. Gage, you'd indicated a concern about buffering. I think current zoning code will handle that by virtue of the 6-foot fence or some sort of buffer. So as much as anything, I wanted to come up and address a few issues, and then if there's any questions I can answer of you all. We also don't have any issue with it going back to the Planning Commission and letting them hear it again either. So is there any other questions you have of me?
Thank you, Mr. Mays. Any other public comment? At this time, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for action. I just have one quick question for Mr. Andrew. If we take this, if we send this back to the Planning Commission for them to get more public input, will the same number of residences be contacted, or are you expanding that scope now to cover everybody all the way down, possibly to Plum Street on those streets?
We would quadruple the area that we did, and we'll just find Willow and Birch wherever they end, and we'll cover it.
So that no stone
way.
is unturned?
Yeah.
Okay.
The statute requires that we notify everybody abutting, so we expanded that to 200 feet, and then it appears that we'll need to go farther south and probably even south of Plum and hit everybody who might be on Birch or Willow.
Okay.
Mayor, quick question, if I may, Dean. I'm presuming that the property in question is all zoned properly for the use that we're talking about and is in accordance with the comprehensive plan?
It's all Zone C5 and shown as commercial retail on the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank
We
you.
actually had, the Board of Zoning Appeals approved a plan to build a neighborhood grocery on the south side of Cypress, but it never got built. But it was a very, very tight fit.
And the zoning remains?
Yes.
Okay.
It has been C5 since the 1970s.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrew. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I'd make a motion that we refer this matter back to the Planning Commission for further work and development through hearing, public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we send this back to the Planning Commission for more public input and continued review on the matter. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 5.2, public hearing and report on petition number 4323, requesting vacation of a portion of the Broadway Boulevard.
Again, I'll open the public hearing. Mr. Andrew?
This is a public hearing, but doesn't involve a street closure. It involves some right-of-way on North Broadway, and all up and down Broadway, the right-of-way is 80 feet wide, except at this one point where it's 140 feet wide, and that dates back to an acquisition by KDOT in the 1930s. Just in the fall of this year, we got all of that property returned back to the ownership of the city, so we control what happens to it. And Barbara Young is the owner of the site that's occupied by Foley Equipment, and the place that she intended to put a sign, we determined it was right-of-way, so she filed this petition requesting to take that 60-foot notch and eliminate it. And as happens every time we research something on North Broadway, something odd comes up, and in this case it was the fact that even though on city street maps and directories we have a street named Hickson Drive, the owners of those properties never actually dedicated that over to the city, and they still own the property. And so whether that is in fact going to be a public street or if it's going to remain private dictates the extent of this right-of-way vacation and writing the description. So we determined that we needed about another week to figure out how to write the description to vacate. And the thing that was further odd was in the 1970s, the city's utility department got an access easement from the owners so that we could access a sewer pump station. And if it was a public street, you would have no reason to need an access easement. So we have that, but not the street right-of-way. So if we had another week, we think we could actually legally describe the area that could go back to Barbara Young. So our recommendation would be to continue this 1 week, and that would allow us to prepare an ordinance that had the correct description. And so this is Hickson Drive right here, and it shows on property maps as being publicly owned, but it's not. And there's a sewer pump station right here that we have an access easement for. It's 20 feet wide, and the street is wider than that. So we think with another week we would have an accurate description of what could go back to Foley Equipment.
Questions of Mr. Andrew? Thank you. Any public comment? I am going to not close the public hearing and leave it open, but I will need a motion to extend it.
Mayor, I move that we continue our public hearing for 1 week until December 14th to give staff some more time regarding the status of Hickson Drive.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to extend the public hearing for 1 week until next Monday, the 14th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0. We will finally get to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of November 23rd, 2009. Item 6.2, resolution number 096683, appointing Dana Bronson to the Convention and Tourism Committee. Item 6.3, award contract for Phase 1 of the Community Development Block Grant Recovery to Ponton Construction for 1428 Ponca Avenue in the amount of $16,425 and 1634 Redwood Drive in the amount of $20,250, and authorize the mayor to sign the contracts. Item 6.4, approve the 2010 Vehicles and Equipment CIP subplan. Item 6.5, authorize the purchase and installation of 2 additional traffic video detection systems from Gady Sales Company Incorporated in the amount of $35,000.
I have a quick question on, I don't know whether I need to pull this from the agenda or not, but on oh, good gravy, hold on. On 6.3, where we've got it down as a consent agenda, why would we have 2 different recommended actions, pro and con? Most consent agendas Everything is in favor. Staff recommends approval, thus the consent agenda. But on 6.3, part of the action is to either approve it or take no action. So I found that unusual that it was under the consent agenda.
Yeah, that's just the standard recommendation we make. Just, for example, even though we place it on consent, we make the judgment to do that. If for some reason one of you might want to discuss a topic like this in more detail and possibly take another action, we just want to make sure you know your options are open.
Okay. Usually all of them are pretty pro, so that's
Yeah,
what
I
got
think
me
we
off
would
guard.
tell you if there was a reason that we would feel, staff would feel that you would need to deny it, we'd emphasize that in there so that you're not left kind of wondering if we support the item or not. So unless you would see that, we'll go ahead, we typically put the options for you, but generally this would mean that we feel it's fine to approve unless you had some concerns that you found on your own.
With that being said, does a commissioner wish to pull anything from the consent agenda? If not, I'll ask for a motion.
Move we approve the consent agenda.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. We will go on to development business.
Item 7.1, application number PDD 03-4D, request an amendment to the use limitation to Lot 2 in the reserves of Prairie Glen Planned Development District. Sub-item 7.1A, first reading ordinance number 09-10527.
Mr. Andrew.
We've given you a lot of background in there about how the reserves at Prairie Glen came about, but that's just, I think, important just to realize that there was a lot of give and take and comments from the neighborhood and adjustments that were made to the plans for this site to try to make it compatible with the housing area that's directly to the east. And as part of that original planned development district, there was approval to construct an office building, which turned out to be a 12,000 square foot office building in an L shape there at the southwest corner of the property. And a permit for that building was issued in 2005, but it's a 12,000 square foot building, and 9,600 square feet of it are still vacant. And the building was built by Overland Ventures of Overland Park, the same group that developed reserves at Prairie Glen, but they have sold it to Salina Building Company. And so they've received some interest from Brown Mackie College about using it as tenant space for their vet tech vocational program. And their uses would be offices, classrooms, lab space, and more than likely a small animal clinic that the vet techs would use for training. And we reviewed the space, we reviewed the zoning that applies to other Brown Mackie operations and the planned development district in place, and we concluded that the only thing you could do with this building is have business or professional offices. So the owner, Salina Building Company, filed this application to change or expand the uses that would be allowed on this property to include business schools and small animal clinics. So again, this is a 12,000 square foot building, only 20% of it's occupied. There are 46 paid parking spaces on the site. We've tried to get as much information as possible, and we can't say definitively that 46 spaces will handle Brown Mackey's parking needs. We're thinking not, if it has any kind of student population at all. And so I think the differences are between what's being proposed in offices is, I think, if this is approved, we'd see an increased activity level there, probably more frequent parking and levels of traffic, and probably more parking than what would be needed if this was completely occupied with offices. I think we do have a conceptual plan layout, don't we? I think it was a separate PDF. This is a potential or conceptual layout with Ohio Street being at the bottom of the screen and South being to the right. It is an L-shaped building, In the upper left corner, it's occupied by an accounting office. And then this is a conceptual layout for how Brown Mackey might utilize the rest of the space. So this was originally approved as C1 zoning. If you look at some of the information about parking, the Reserves at Prairie Glen Apartments has 186 parking spaces of their own. This office suite has 46 spaces of its own. The ordinance does allow for shared parking arrangements. We have a number of them around town. One example would be the Salina Cares Clinic has shared parking over at the Elmore Center for some of its employees. That is easily within 600 feet of the entrance to the health care clinic. In this case, they're proposing to use the First Southern Baptist Church parking lot for supplemental or additional parking. And if it is a voluntary arrangement, which means that they have enough parking, but it's just voluntary, then the distance requirements wouldn't necessarily come into play. But if they need that parking in the First Southern Baptist Church lot, that distance is, as we measured, well over 900 feet from the front door of this to the First Southern Baptist lot. And we have the ArcGIS that has an aerial photo, and maybe that would depict that a little more clearly. But this is the office building and the parking in front. There's a sidewalk along Ohio, and then this is existing parking here for First Southern Baptist Church. So a typical user, if they're using the sidewalk, would be coming up to here and then getting into the lot. That distance is, depending on how it's measured and where you park your car, is over 900 feet. And so looking at this, the changes in activity level and parking seem to be the primary changes that this would impact compared to the office use. So the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this. Again, as with the situation on Cypress and Crawford, you have a situation where we give notice to the record owner. In this case, Rod's Texaco is a tenant. They're not the owner, and the owner initiated the petition. In this case, the notice was to Overland Ventures, which is an overland park, but we have a number of residents who live in those apartments that wouldn't have gotten that individualized notice. But the Planning Commission did have a hearing on November 17th. They recommended approval of the addition of those uses and to grant an exception to the 600-foot distance limitation on the use of shared parking. So this comes to you with that recommendation, and your options would be to approve the addition of business schools and small animal clinics, included the requested exception to allow shared parking to be on the Southern Baptist Church property. You could approve this with any special conditions or modifications that you thought were appropriate. You could send it back to the Planning Commission if you think you need additional information or major revisions should be made to the applicant's plan for providing parking, or you could deny the request. The attached ordinance that was handed out here at the meeting is based on the Planning Commission's recommendation, and it spells out the ability to add animal clinics and business schools in addition to offices, and also expresses the Planning Commission's recommendation that the 600-foot distance limitation, that there be an exception for that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Clearly, you can see from the aerial photo that there is a single shared access on Ohio, and I guess the one concern I would have if I was a resident of the apartment complex is that the Brown Mackey students might be more inclined to park in the apartment spaces than in the church spaces, and how that could be addressed or policed may be something that they would need to make suggestions on. But you've got the physical spaces to the church to the north. It's not going to be using those during the daytime hours, so they're available. But human nature tells you that people may want to park closer than that.
And they would be holding class even in the evening, is that correct? So this could be during the day and at night?
I think I'll let their representatives address that. I don't know enough about the specifics of the program at this point, other than how much space is going to be occupied and with what uses.
Mr. Andrew, there's no, I guess just south of the church, is that just green space? There's no connection in the parking lot? They'll have to drive back out to Ohio to get into the church parking lot and then...
Well, there's a driveway here, and there's a driveway, actually this is the driveway in, so
They'll have to come back out.
there is a plan long-term that would have some more spaces down here, and I believe there's a driveway here that has a chain or barricade across it, but they were approved to have a second curb cut down here, but there's
still no
they have a
connection.
plan for more parking. It's just not all built. But that church has had about 5 or 6 different construction phases, and there's a plan that shows parking down into here and a driveway, but that's not been built yet. I do believe we have representatives of the application if you have questions for them.
Any questions of Mr. Andrew?
During this process, was the church present? And I guess nighttime courses we can ask of the applicant, but of the church, it's almost saying then that the church would decide not to have any, any daytime activities, be it a special session or a conference or an anything, and then I asked for a little bit of guidance here. If we approve that, and that's not the plan now, and then that's changed down the road, then we're going to have
Parking issues.
kind of a conditional thing here that could really just blow back up to us.
Shared parking works if there is a non-conflict between those things, and generally that's been done by letter. But I mean, an example I would have is there's a church that meets at the corner of Ohio and North Street on the southwest corner. They have like 2 parking spaces on their site. They have a shared parking agreement with Great Plains Manufacturers, but it allows them only to use that parking Wednesday evenings and Sunday mornings. So the real question is, if there's an agreement with the church to use it in daytime hours only and not on Sundays, then that would have to be changed in order to allow them to have evening classes. But I can't speak to the question of evening classes. I think that's best left to their representatives.
Or under that question, then if the church did decide they were going to do daytime activities, they could revoke that shared agreement, and then at that point in time, we'd have a parking issue again, potentially.
Yes, just like we do now out at Brown Mackey, because they stopped busing students.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Andrew, I have a question also. On the entrance drive there, coming in, there's a little green area which would be to the west. Is that available to build parking on, or is that something?
This area here, I suppose that, I mean, this was a pretty unique design, and part of the selling point, so to speak, of being able to have offices there was that it would blend in architecturally with the apartments and provide green space. So if it would be difficult to configure much parking in there. You could probably gain some spaces, but not many, and we would lose green space. But that was part of the selling point for having apartments and office mix there, was that would be retained as green space and landscaped.
Okay, thank you.
And then south of that building, isn't that the drainage corridor?
Yeah,
There's
there's
no
a
buildable area
ditch.
back there, is that right?
No, that's a city-owned drainage right-of-way, right to behind there. So that, this road here is owned by the city. There's a emergency gate here that provides access for fire trucks and others in the case of an emergency to get in from that way, but that's used to maintain the ditch.
Did you say there was someone here representing them?
I don't know if they...
Didn't come as representative. I just came.
From Brown Mackie College? Oh. Are you representing Brown Mackie College? Yeah, do you know if they have plans for evening classes? To or that?
That is still pretty fluid. You want name and address again? Jeff Mace, Compo Realty, 157 South 7th. There we go.
Thank you.
This plan has been kind of evolving. In fact, this all started out with the pursuit of a 6,000 square foot space, and now we're up to 10,500 square foot by virtue of going ahead and utilizing the entire space. I don't know that they could answer that question as far as evening. I will tell you, though, we're working real closely with the church to establish an agreement that works for both parties. Brown Mackie is very, very sensitive to having enough parking. The current proposal that's in front of the church's council right now calls for an 8-to-1 parking ratio, which is well in excess of anything that the city ordinances would require. That's what Brown Mackie is requiring in order for us to execute the lease. So, and then if you look at those numbers up into the church parking lot, even at that 8-to-1, they've got
Sufficient.
They've got a ton of parking at the church. I mean, short of having a full mass and so on and so forth, it's just not. We just don't. We've run the loops trying to make sure this is going to work, because we as Brown Mackie don't want to end up with what you're describing and signing a long-term commitment in this
Right.
building. Conversely, we want to be, Salina Building Company, who I also am here representing, is they want to make sure that they don't end up with a problem with the tenant and the church and so on and so forth. So there's council involved, and this agreement's being looked at pretty hard. I think Mr. Andrew brought up a good point that Salina Building Company and I have discussed in length, and they're planning on doing quite a little bit of signage with Overland Ventures in regards to absolutely no Brown Mackie parking in the apartments, and doing what we can do. I don't know if any of you are aware, I learned this through the process that Brown Mackie College, where they currently are, you can drive by and see that they have parking issues. They then in turn did an agreement with Central Mall to overflow over into Central Mall. They're not concerned at all about this 600, 900. They're not concerned at all about the distance, because they feel like it's close enough to be workable for their students. So we are sensitive to the apartment overflow, and I think the agreement's gonna, with what we do with the church. I think we're only talking about picking up something in the neighborhood of 40 spaces from them, and if you look at that parking lot, it's a
huge,
big
yeah.
parking lot. As far as the evening classes, I can't speak to that, and frankly, I don't know that Brown Mackie could right now. They know that they're going to have the vet tech with the animal clinic, and then they're also looking at starting a new program to offer in their curriculum some business oriented program as well in the space, just to utilize the space now that we have it.
This is going to date me, but since the beginning of time, those people at Brown Mackie have had parking issues. They were downtown.
Downtown, that's correct.
And they had parking issues.
That's correct.
Now they're a little bit further south, and they have parking issues. So
We
they have
have,
expanded by leaps and bounds.
We
And
have been we've been all over town and trying to find a scenario that works well for them and what they're wanting to do. Frankly, this program, with their initial intent when we entered the market, should have been open 8 months ago, and here we are still trying to make sure we can get a deal struck. So, because they're very sensitive to making sure it's structured right before they make a commitment.
exactly.
Substantial commitment, both in money and in time.
Thank you, Mr. Mays. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional public comment?
Madam Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Terry Sherman, and I live at the Reserves, 2515 South Ohio. And it's been stated how many apartments we have. We have 6 buildings, 16 apartments per building, so that's 186 was 96 apartments. And they figured 2 people per apartment, so that's 192 people minimum. The commercial building parking lot does not access a public street. It accesses the entrance and exit of the reserves. And in that little area is like an island, so that you come in on the right, you exit on the left. The exit of the commercial building is down a little further, so that if cars are coming out that, they're going to block the entrance from Ohio into our area to get to our apartments. And I don't know whether anyone has ever come into our apartment complex in the evening, but when you're going south on Ohio, you can hardly see the area to come into our apartments because there is no light there. There is none whatsoever, and there's a right and left area to come into. I guess when they talk about the 45 parking spaces with the church, and the church does have a big parking lot, but I don't think you're going to get the students to go to that parking lot to park. When they come in the driveway, our entryway to the apartments, and if there's no parking space in that complex in front of the office building, they're just going to take any space they can in there. And our parking spaces are tight. When you put if everybody's home, there's not hardly any parking spaces other than up around the office area. And I just think that if the Brown Mackey students have a sticker on their car, that they can be identified and then have their car towed out if they park there. But if there's no way of knowing who they are, there's no way of policing the situation.
And I totally understand. While we hope that most of those students are responsible adults, I know that they're looking for convenience, especially in inclement weather, closest parking spot. Sure. What I see happening is that the reserves will probably give their tenants some kind of a sticker or decal so it identifies you that you are there. And if there's an unmarked car there, that's the only thing I can think of, is that those cars will be towed, of which they may be the Brown Mackey students' cars. It will only take that 1 or 2 times, I think, for that to happen before those students learn not to park in your places and utilize the church parking lot. But after listening to Mr. Mays, I understand that everybody is still kind of in the learning phase of this, so I think it's going to be by trial and error, and it's all going to depend on exactly what kind of a curriculum they're going to offer and the scheduling of that.
That's true.
But I totally understand with you, and that was the thought that was already in my head,
that is just going to congest.
I have been in that little area, and I totally understand. I see the concept of the parking there. So that is one of my concerns. So also
appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment?
I have a question. Mr. Andrew or Mr. Mays, was there any discussion about putting in a second driveway right there into the office complex?
And is there not even a sign there that says that you're entering the reserves? She says you can, I'm familiar with that, but I've not paid attention to see if she says there's no lighting.
There's an entry sign, and
there is.
The city's policy is to put street lights where public streets intersect public streets. And of course, one of the issues out here is that you have that long frontage on both sides of Ohio where there's no public street that actually enters there, but maybe that's something that we could look at with Public Works and Engineering, is whether there should be some sort of street light there near that entrance, because basically on the east side there's no street intersection. The other thing that needs to be considered is when this was all proposed and developed, Ohio, the widening was not a certainty. And so when this was actually built, Ohio was 2 lanes wide, and the goal was to attempt to minimize the number of intersecting points there. And again, you get back to the fact that the selling point of the office complex was that it was going to be a quiet, low-traffic user there, and that the activity would be much lower than what the apartments would have, and that is something that can be looked at. There was a traffic study that was done at the time, and it because of the lack of turning lanes and other things, it recommended having only a single entry and exit point, but
You know,
that is something that could be looked at.
I suppose it's mostly going to be faculty parking in that close parking lot anyway, so that probably limits the number of students there to
And which should
how many
reduce the in and
lots.
outs.
Right.
Mr. Stack.
We are adding streetlights to this corridor. It was approved a few months ago by you all with the landscaping and a few other items we dealt with that day. But the street lighting is coming. It's supposed to be installed this next year.
Okay.
KCPL.
Thank you, Mr. Stack.
One other point I'd like to make is we talk about the existing parking lot. If this weren't for a zoning request, we could have went in with any office user and filled that parking lot full of cars, and while I'm sensitive to the overflow into the apartment complex, if we're able to find a suitable agreement with the church and address that, I mean, I understand the issue there, but as far as the use of the parking lot of the office complex, it doesn't make any difference whether it's Brown Mackey there or a large accounting firm that's filling the building. Those parkings, that traffic's still going to be the same. Does that make you understand my point? I mean, I understand the overflow into the apartments, but they still have the right to use the full, all the lots, all the spaces available to them.
I'm having a deja vu. I think we talked about parking last Monday, so, or last time.
Whenever we were here.
We're becoming parking specialists here. Any other public comment? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 09-10527, approving the addition of business schools and small animal clinics as permitted uses on Lot 2 of the PDD, including the requested exception to allow shared parking to be located at the First Southern Baptist Church.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt ordinance number 09-10527, considering approval of an amendment of the use limitations applicable to Lot 2 in the reserves at Prairie Glen Plan Development District. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 3-2 with Jennings and Arky voting nay.
Item 7.2, application number Z09-10, requesting approval of an amendment by adding building supply stores and lumber yards, business schools, department and discount stores, and food stores to the list of conditional uses in Section 42-418.2 of the South 9th Street Corridor Overlay District. Sub-item 7.2A, first reading ordinance number 09-10528.
Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an application that's filed by Mr. Norm Riffle, who owns property known as Riffle Addition Number 2. That's the area immediate north of Long MacArthur Ford. He is in what's known as the South 9th Street Corridor Overlay District, and there are different reasons for the origins for that, but it was primarily driven by the desire for Long MacArthur Ford to develop a car dealership out there, and the city was in no way ready for it at the time, as it had no utility systems or anything in that area, so there was a a joint city-county task force that was put together, as well as a planning agreement to have a consultant look at that corridor and make some recommendations, and the result was a corridor overlay district, which has a short list of permitted uses and a longer list of conditional uses, which have to be reviewed on a case-by-case, location-by-location basis. And so it's important because within that area, the only zoning designation you can apply for is that corridor overlay district. And the purpose of it was twofold. One was to have some higher architectural or aesthetic standards for a major entryway into the community from the south. The other was concern about the truck traffic in the south industrial area on the east and how it intermixed with the traffic generated on the west side, which was predominantly vacant at the time. And there was some concern about things like the types of uses that Mr. Riffle is talking about, such as department and discount stores and grocery stores and things of that nature, and how those might interact. And as an example of that, in 1989, I worked with to develop a grant application to KDOT for them to fund a full interchange at Schilling Road and rebuild Schilling Road to improve truck access to the airport authority. And in 2004, KDOT concluded that because of the commercial traffic from Walmart and some of those other uses, Schilling wasn't a desirable route for trucks to get to the airport industrial area, and they funded the construction of water well so that trucks could get to the airport without going through commercial traffic. So that is part of the rationale there. Mr. Riffle had his property approved for commercial overlay district rezoning. He identified some uses that he thought would be appropriate for his particular property, but they weren't listed at all in the corridor overlay district, either as permitted or conditional. And so he applied for a text amendment to add 4 uses, which is building supply stores and lumber yards, business schools, department stores, and food stores, which would be grocery type stores, and add those to the list of conditional uses. And I don't think the planning perspective that allowing those just as permitted uses would be a particularly good idea, but one thing that the conditional use process does is that it does require an application that does, if deemed appropriate, require a traffic study and justification that that location can handle the type of property generation of traffic that you might see. So you have there in front of you the list of permitted uses, which is very short, a longer list of things like hotels, motels, and restaurants, which are allowed on a conditional basis. And if this request is approved, it would allow that up and down the corridor as a conditional use. I don't believe that Mr. Riffle, when he filed the application, realized that it would apply to more than just his property. But this area here in white is the CO district. It starts down at the Sleep Inn and works its way up to a Riffle addition in the south edge of Lowe's. So if this were approved, it would allow people that own property within that area to apply for these uses, but it wouldn't make it necessarily automatic. I think the city managers raised a good point that if this list of uses keeps getting added to, eventually you would lose some of the reasons for having a separate overlay district in the first place. The one thing that it does have that's not present in other areas on South 9th is it does have some architectural and aesthetic standards, which I think resulted in Marshalls and Long MacArthur maybe turning out more attractive than they might have without them. But it is true that if you make this comparable with all the other commercial districts as far as uses, you do start to lose the distinctiveness. But this was heard by the Planning Commission on November 17th. They recommended approval of that, but only as conditional uses. And your options would be to approve those 4 uses as requested. You could look at those and delete any of them you think are not appropriate. You could send this back to the Planning Commission for additional study, or you could decline to approve this amendment at all. I guess our recommendation would be to review their recommendation on the 4 uses. We provided a background report there that shows how this corridor plan came about, and that you should take whatever action you think is in the best interest of traffic safety and the vitality of this corridor. But this was filed by Mr. Riffle, but it's not specific to his property only. He's trying to amend the whole district.
Questions of staff?
Mr. Andrew, in reading through all of this, I couldn't figure out, at least the first thing that jumped out to me is when the overlay district was set up, where did we anticipate this type of development would go if it wasn't going to go on South Ninth? Where were we trying to push it to?
Well, at the time, there were still, and there still are, open spaces on South 9th north of Schilling Road. And the difference was that the automobile dealers were saying that those sites weren't large enough to accommodate a dealership, and that this particular area of the corridor was the only place where there was enough land area to assemble for the large-scale dealerships that you see there today. But there were 2 concerns at the time. One was that there was no plan for improving or widening South 9th. It's difficult to envision now, but a lot of those improvements down at Waterwell Road were not there. It was a narrow 2-lane road in front of there at the time, and there was a lot of truck activity with Exide and other places, and there was concern having to move truck traffic from Schilling to Waterwell of not replicating that again.
So are you saying with the improvements to South 9th, that's no longer a concern?
That's what Mr. Riffle believes, that if the city is going to go in and extend Phase 5 and do the improvements to South 9th with the full turn lanes and center turn lanes and full widening and all that, a lot of the original reasons for limiting uses are not there, but that's could be down the road from when these types of uses that would go in. But if this is approved and somebody had a plan to put a lumber yard on Mr. Riffle's property, a traffic study could be required, and whether that was specifically a good location or not, and what improvements were needed to make it work as far as turn lanes and other things could be looked at.
What's the timeline for, did you say Phase 5 of South 9th?
I might have my phases wrong, but there is a phase that goes from Riffle Drive south all the way to Waterwell.
What's the timeline on that?
I may have to look at the guy with the money tie, but I believe that phase is identified but unfunded right now. Right.
That's what I thought. And is that 6? 5. It is 5, okay. You were right.
Now, which piece of property did we approve platting on? That was a horseshoe or a single entrance cul-de-sac?
Horseshoe is right up here. You have, this is Lowe's right here, and this is the Riffle Edition, has a TSC store and restaurants and motels, and what he owns is right here, and you approved a plat and zoning for that, but the zoning that is in place now, if he had somebody come to him and say, I want to build a grocery store on your property, no, they couldn't even apply for that. What this would do, if it was approved, it would allow that to be applied for, but if people who wanted to develop that weren't willing to do the necessary traffic improvements or turn lanes or things like that, it could be denied. But today, it couldn't even be applied for.
If it was something size-wise comparable with Lowe's, if we're talking lumber companies, doesn't that hog up that whole site that was platted at 5 lots or something?
Yeah, the lots that he has platted in there aren't really large enough to support real big users. He would have to bring 2 lots together or merge them together somehow to make it work. But I believe Mr. Riffle's representative is here, and he could address some of those questions. But again, we tried not to focus on just Mr. Riffle's property, but the whole corridor, and basically is anywhere along there, if somebody wanted to do a grocery store, they couldn't apply today. This would allow them to apply, but it doesn't mean it's automatic either. Instead of just applying for a building permit, they would have to go through a review process that could include a traffic study and other things. That makes it a little more palatable. But this also isn't 1997 anymore, and at that time, it seemed like, well, where do you draw the line on how far south retail in Salina goes? And you have to visualize that there was no Long MacArthur or Marshall Motors or anything out there at the time.
How much of that corridor is undeveloped? I mean, it seems like most of it is now with MacArthur.
There's
and
a tract that's south of Marshall Motors between there and Waterwell Road that's undeveloped. There's something on the order of 17 or 18 acres that's north of Long MacArthur. That's neither platted or developed.
Did you say north
North of Long MacArthur Ford.
Okay.
And that's between Mr. Riffle's property and here. What happened was that there used to be the interstate slip ramps in there, and KDOT, those properties went back to Mr. Riffle and Long MacArthur, and Long MacArthur would have to come in and plat and square off their property, but there is quite a bit of property in there in terms of acreage that would be developable. So it primarily would be Mr. Riffle's, the area north of Long MacArthur, and then there's a smaller piece south of Marshall Motors. And then you have the property on the east side.
And this wouldn't change the architectural requirements at all? This is just a use issue?
No, it just, what, I guess, and Mr. Wasco, if he wishes to speak to this, can do it. What it's saying is if a grocery store came to Mr. Riffle and said, we want to buy some of your property and build a store, the answer today would be, no, you can't even apply for that. If this was approved, the answer could be possibly if you have a good plan.
Okay. The monopolizing.
That's the best way I can characterize it.
Additional questions? Thank you. I'll open it up to public comment.
My name is Bob Wasco, 219 North Santa Fe. Mr. Riffle couldn't be here today. He's got the unfortunate circumstance of being in Phoenix, Arizona. I don't have really a whole lot to add to what Dean has said. I think he's accurately described what the circumstance is. I think Mr. Riffle believes, for what you've just discussed, that there have been some change of circumstances and that 9th Street is expanding. Keep in mind, he really didn't understand. It's not staff's fault. He didn't comprehend that a text amendment would change the whole corridor. His property is primarily on the north end, just south of his present development, and he was a little bit surprised, well, quite a bit surprised, but what lots, what uses ended up in that development. I think he had a whole different concept of what was going to be there, and over time, because of the development, it just changed, and he thinks something similar will be happening now. Obviously, he doesn't contemplate the big box stores, at least not yet, by the fact that he has divided it up into 5 or 6 lots. But things change, and what he liked, just have the opportunity. Obviously, he's got to come back to you to get approved, so he doesn't think there's a whole lot being lost to you if you allow it today.
He doesn't have any immediate plans in the works?
We've had some discussions, but nothing strong enough to give you today.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Any other public comment? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
that we approve the proposed amendments to Sections 42-418.2 of the CO District Regulations as requested by the applicant.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to adopt on first reading ordinance number 09-10528, application Z09-10, requesting approval of an amendment by adding building supply stores, lumber yards, business schools, departments, and discount stores, and food stores, and delicatessens to the list of conditional uses in section 42-418.2 of the South 9th Street Corridor Overlay District. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 7.3, application number SP09-1, requesting approval of a special permit to allow construction of a wireless communication tower in an R1 district at the Central High School campus located at 650 East Crawford.
Mr. Andrew.
As much as we'd like to merge South and Central together, we're going to keep them separate because you're going to vote on them separately. But the first application relates to the Central High School campus, and Verizon Wireless, through their agent Selective Site Consultants, has zeroed in that as a site for a potential tower and antenna that would help with their network in town. Their representative can explain that much better than I, but they don't have a great need for height like we have out at East Crawford, which is a 220-foot tower. What they really need is volume, because with people texting and sending pictures and things like that, they're consuming capacity in the system, and they need more towers to be able to relay those types of images. And so they found in their discussions, and I apologize that the maps you got in your packets look much better in color as far as their search rings and their bandwidths and all, but this is where they zeroed in on in the central part of Salina, and that is really that Central High campus worked quite well, and I suggested to them that in many communities those poles served a dual purpose of stadium lights at stadiums as well as supporting cell phone towers and antennae, and so they did have some preliminary discussions with the school district. The school district is open to that, and so they have this specific proposal now. They'd like to take a 90-foot tall light pole at the southwest corner of Salina Stadium and replace it with a 130-foot monopole. And by monopole, that's exactly what it means. It's just a straight up and down pole. It looks like a light support that you'd see on the interstate, but it would have antenna at the top of it. And I think we have some other illustrations there, Alyssa, that these are their search patterns and their poles, which they need to provide us to justify that they do have the need. But this is not real easy to see, but the pole on the right-hand side there is where the new light support would go. There's a fence. The ticket booths are up here, so you'd walk into the stadium. These are the ticket booths. This pole would replace a light pole, and then they'd have an equipment shed just outside that area. I think, do we have some photographs of Central High that maybe we could put up that basically superimposes that? This is a picture of the building from the different angles, but if you were up towards Crawford and looking south along the west side of the stadium, this is a projection of what it would look like, which is to take one pole down and replace it with this. They are designing it in a way that they could be the lower user, and there's a potential for another cell service provider to lease space up on the upper portion of that, and the city's policies have a preference for that so that you don't have each individual cell service provider having their own tower. If they can share space, that means fewer towers and less impact. But we looked at this and looked at where the locational preferences were in the ordinance, and the use of athletic fields and school grounds and recreation areas is a preferred location for these types of facilities. And with the camouflaging technique, Planning Commission was supportive of this, and at their meeting on the 17th of November, they recommended approval of a permit to erect a 130-foot tower in this location at Salina Stadium. When the situation was looked at, we do have a requirement for landscaping around the base of towers in our ordinance, but that's primarily for areas where the tower is kind of out in the open and standing by itself. But here with the stadium walls and the building and other things, you won't even be able to see the base of the tower, so it didn't seem like there was any place where landscaping could even go. So the Planning Commission recommended a waiver of that requirement. So the alternatives for you in this case is you could concur with that recommendation and approve a special permit with or without the recommended landscaping waiver. You could ask the applicant to modify their proposal to decrease the tower height or move the tower to a different side of the stadium, or what you thought might be appropriate. You could return this to the Planning Commission for reconsideration of their recommendation, or you could deny the request. But the applicants, we do have a pretty detailed process for submitting information to justify the need for a standalone tower, and they have provided all that documentation. They, to my understanding, do not have a lease yet with the school district, but that's the zoning aspect of this is your final decision. The lease is the final decision of the school district, but they do have permission and encouragement to pursue this.
Questions of Mr. Andrew?
And I do have, if he's still here, Trevor Wood with the Selective Site Consultants here if you have technical questions.
I assume the schools get some sort of compensation for this.
Yes, there would be a lease where the school district receives compensation. Actually, out on East Crawford, the city receives compensation from 4 users who have antennas on the tower out at East Crawford. So there's a lease between the tower owner and the city gets revenue based on how many users there are on the tower. I don't know how close they are to having a lease, but that is correct that the school district could potentially benefit from the lease revenue.
And I caught a portion of this Planning Commission meeting, but I don't remember what the answer was for sure. But it seemed like the city does not allow, we don't allow towers to be placed on top of our water towers, correct?
We don't allow, at least up to this point, we have not allowed cell tower providers to stick antennas on water towers, and some of it's aesthetic and some of it is liability. Some of the shapes of the newer towers aren't really conducive to having people who aren't working under city contract or supervision climbing around on those towers. Ms. Tasker could speak to that better, but we don't have any antennas on city water towers presently.
Additional questions? Thank you. I'll open it up to public comment. Seeing that there is none, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move that we approve application SP09 number 1 filed by Selective Site Consultants for the cell tower at the Salina Central High campus with the waiver of the landscaping as brought forward from the Planning Commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt application number SP09-1, requesting approval of the special permit to allow construction of a wireless communication tower in an R1 district at Salina Central High School campus located at 650 East Crawford. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 7.4, application number SP09-2, requesting approval of a special permit to allow construction of a wireless communication tower in an R1 district at the South High School campus located at 730 East Magnolia Road.
Mr. Andrew?
Same concept, slightly lower tower, only about 10 feet lower than Central High. The primary distinction is that this would be on the east side of an existing football practice field and track, which is not lighted. And so there's no pole to replace. I guess if you visualized a plan to light that stadium or that field or add seating or have lighting there, then the possibility of, and our location is right here south of this sidewalk, and it's being designed and located so that it could be the first pole of future poles if there were a plan to light that field there, but it will be a standalone pole, but it will be well south of Magnolia and well east of any type of residential there. I said that the primary difference being there's no existing pole to replace. It's 10 feet lower, and in this case, the school district did express a desire and a plan to put some landscaping around the base of that at the time that it's installed. But this was reviewed simultaneously with the Central High application, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of the request, but recommended that landscaping, which is a requirement, not be waived here, and the school district says they have plans to do that anyway.
Okay. Any questions regarding the tower at south location? I'll open it up to public comment. If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve application SP09, number 2, filed by the Selective Site Consultants requesting approval for the special permit to allow for construction of a wireless communication tower in an R1 single-family residential district at Salina South High School campus, located at 703 East Magnolia.
7:30. 7:30 East Magnolia.
Oh, not 03, they moved it. 730 East Magnolia. With landscaping is required.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept application number SP09-2 for a communication tower at Salina South High School campus. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. Administration.
Item 8.2, first reading ordinance number 09, 10,529, levying special assessments against certain lots and pieces of property to pay the cost of abatement of nuisances.
It's not Mr. Andrew. It's Mr. Franz.
Mayor and Commissioners, this is a process we now go through twice a year, is to assess the unpaid portions of the costs we've incurred to clean, clear, mow, whatever we need to do to property that's been determined to be a nuisance. This particular round covers approximately the last 6-month period. We originally billed just a little bit less than $28,000 in costs, and are now $21,816.88 left to certify. We will then certify that to the county clerk, and it will be placed on the next round of tax bills.
Any questions of Mr. Franz? Thank you. Any public comment? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I'd move we approve ordinance number 09-10529 on first reading.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt on first reading ordinance number 09-10529, levying special assessments against certain lots and pieces of property to pay the cost of abatement of nuisances. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 8.3, authorization for seating modification for the Bicentennial Center Arena to ensure compliance with the American with Disabilities Act.
Good evening, Commissioners. What we are seeking to do at the Bicentennial Center is we want to go out for bids, and we're seeking authorization to do that, to bring back sealed bids, to do basically information that was recommended to the facility back in June of 2000, which is increasing the number of accessible seating in the facility. Looking at the diagram that you see over here, there are 4 sections of seating that are marked by blue, which is a little difficult to see in this light, I'm afraid. Sections 106, 107, 110, and 111, which allows for accessible seating in the facility. What we're seeking to do is to make the change to where we add 8 more sections of accessible seating, which are highlighted in the red areas. This would bring us into compliance with the American Disabilities Act. The reason this is being brought to you all at this time is in that bowl of seating that you see right there is 5,225 seats. What is required by the American Disabilities Act is 1% of that seating to be allowed for accessible seating. And with that, there must also be a companion seat available to those individuals. By doing this seating plan that we are proposing that we're going to be going out for bids, that we'd like to ask for authorization to go out for bids on, it would give us a total of 108 seats, 54 accessible seats, 54 companion seats. The study that was done back in 2000 recommended bringing the number of seating for accessibility to 53. We would have a small margin above what is required for us to have, and it would make it more marketable for us for different types of events and et cetera at the Bicentennial Center.
Questions?
Are some of those the VIP seating that's used at certain events now?
Not really, no, sir.
No.
Everything that's up there. Now, we do have situations and circumstances where they may put a camera in that area to record an event.
Okay.
We have, on the 3A, 4A volleyball championships that we had several schools that filmed their teams from up there, but not generally VIP seats.
So no real concerns about creating
No, sir.
anything else? Thank you.
No, sir.
And all of these seats are located on that second level where they have to take the elevator?
Yes, ma'am. Up at the top of the slide here, you can see are 2 green boxes. That represents the elevators that are in the arena that you would use to
there you go.
access up to that level. And from there, you get to that. It's perfectly level. That's what the plan is to make sure that that is all level. We don't actually need this type of seating in a regular concert where there is seating down on the floor. But as we referenced in the report, like in 3A, 4A volleyball, where the floor is not available, the Tribe Rivers Stadium, Tribe Rivers Fair, where they have the horse show and everything, that area is not accessible. We need to have the more accessible seating as per the code.
Additional questions? Thank you, Mr. Perry.
I did just want to thank Gina McDonald from the Human Relations Department who helped us pull all this information together, as well as the fine folks over at Building Services who helped us put all this information together and come up with a good plan on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any public comment? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I'd move we authorize the seating modifications for the Bicentennial Center Arena to ensure compliance with the American Disabilities Act.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for authorization for seating modification at the Bicentennial Center Arena to ensure compliance with the ADA. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 8.4, accept special inspection task force report.
Mr. Sprague.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. In response to concerns about the practicality as well as the differences between the code language and actual practice, a task force was formed to look at Chapter 17, which is entitled Special Inspections. And so 9 members were appointed to that task force, and they're listed there in the blue sheet. They were selected for the intent of representing both the development community as well as the design community, and as well as a contractor or a fabricator that's involved with metal fabrication, which is a subject of special inspections. So the 9-member task force was formed with the specific intent of reporting back to both the Building Advisory Board and the City Commission. And the reason the City Commission was included in that direct report, rather than just going back to the Building Advisory Board and having them forward their recommendations, is that it was expressly identified that we wanted representation from membership of the Building Advisory Board on the Special Inspections Task Force. And to avoid the possibility of a conflict of interest, we indicated at that time that the report would come to you as the City Commission directly, as well as back to the Building Advisory Board. So at this point, they have met a number of times and reviewed the chapter in considerable detail and have formulated their recommendations. One option that they had was to go through each of the inspection items, the special inspections that were called for in that chapter, and consider those, identify whether they wanted to continue to require that special inspection or modify the requirements of that special inspection, whether it be a continuous inspection, a periodic inspection, the level of detail. The task force intentionally chose not to do that and to leave the required special inspections intact as they're currently written in the chapter, and instead they proposed kind of an alternate format. One of the things that they specifically indicated interest in was empowering the design professional to just determine on a case-by-case basis which special inspections they felt were necessary on an individual project. Staff looked at that, and with the assistance of the city attorney, identified that raised concerns about unlawful delegation of authority of the city commission in terms of adoption of the ordinance requirements, and then delegating that to a design professional in terms of whether they applied on a case-by-case basis. So as a compromise, the language that is in the proposal that's coming to you and the Building Advisory Board continues to require all the special inspections as prescribed in Chapter 17, continues to require submission of a statement of special inspections by the design professional, and what it adds is the opportunity for the design professional to identify inspections that they do not believe in their professional opinion are necessary and submit a justification for those admissions. Does not empower them just to waive those requirements, but to identify those for the consideration of the building official. Then it goes on to provide that in the event that the building official does not concur, that rather than just the building official's discretion, it would require third-party peer review at the expense of the city. The presumption being that it involves an expert in the field rather than just the building official. That is probably the most significant, in my opinion, change. There are a number of other items that were highlighted in the red line document that you received. I guess the other thing that I would say in general is that there were a number of instances where the chapter currently provides for building official review and approval, and it recommends an amendment by striking the building official and inserting the design professional in responsible charge. However, it does not empower the design professional to change those requirements. It just gives them some of the more practical oversight of the project as it progresses, with ultimate reporting going back to the building official, both in terms of reporting to them the status as well as record keeping that is retained by the city. If you'd like, I'd be happy to go through it in greater detail in terms of the individual building official items that were struck and replaced with the design professional.
Let me think about it.
With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So basically, from us today, you don't need any action.
Correct.
You just need any input, if any.
Correct.
Or suggestions or comments. Can I ask how the list came to be of the task force?
We actually took expressions of interest, and we had more expressions of interest than we intended to appoint to the task force, and that was an appointment process by the mayor and commission.
How many forms did we receive? Interest? Just
I don't recall off the top of my head, 15, 20?
Quite a few.
Something like that. Right.
Okay. Okay, that's a good sign. So any comments?
Can end up to be a lengthy process, can it? It's time frame during a project, right?
It certainly was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to follow this in the midst of a project.
Well, yes, and frankly, I think it was kind of eye-opening as the group sat down and said, this is what the chapter says, but this is what we really do in the field. And so they spent quite a bit of time trying to rectify the actual practice to the code language. But yes, it is a very detailed process.
No other comments from us? Okay, thank you, Mr. Scragg.
I move we recess in executive session for 10 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason the public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and reconvene in this room at 6 o'clock.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we recess into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. We are in executive session. Do you expect
We do
to
not.
take any action? No. We are in executive session.
Yeah.
We haven't had a lot of meetings.